All right, welcome back. So hopefully you have gone out and you have done your capacity assessment. You now got your capacity score and you've got a bit more of an idea around where you're starting from. Now, in the last video, we talked about the fire and the fade, the difference between the two, and the effect that being in the fade has across your mental, physical, and emotional wellness, and how that cascades across your life in the different areas. We talked about compensation, the different nervous system states, and we finished by saying, well, how do we actually close the gap? How do we go from fire to fade? So let's start with what most people will do as a standard approach to get from fire to fade, from A to B. You're here, okay? You're at point A. You're in the fade. You're compensating. You're struggling. And you want to get back to the fire. So what do? We try. We work harder. We implement all these different tools and trainings and structures and things to try and get us back into the fire. We might do morning routines. We might try biohacking. We might try coaches and training programs. We might try meditation, breath work, cold plunges. We might try, switching up our diet. We do all these different things that require effort. But the problem is that effort only adds to the erosion, because all you're doing is layering these different tools, techniques, trainings, and things on top of an already overloaded nervous system. You haven't got the capacity. And now you're asking to do things that require capacity. All of these different things, meditation, journaling, time management, networking, leadership courses, coaching, biohacking, fitness program, all of that stuff that you know you want to do and you can absolutely do when you're in the fire, they're what I call creation level tools. And I'll explain what that means in a minute. But right now, you're layering all this shit onto a system that just doesn't have the capacity to barely function, and you expect to do any of this. It's why it's so difficult to actively stick to anything, because you just ain't got the capacity. And that's why people start to think, well, I'm lazy, I lack motivation, I don't have discipline or consistency, I can't do any of that. And that's not true, because when you're in a fire, you can do all of that. But when you're in a fade, it's just a case of nervous system state, low capacity. So if we can't go from A to B with effort, what can we do? And I also want to challenge you to look at this in a different way, because this A to B model of thinking is linear, and it's the way most people see things. You can replace fire and fade with personal goals. This could be someone starting over here with zero fitness, wants to run 5K at point B. So they put all these different things that they're going to do, starting a running plan, getting some new trainers, buying gym clothes, whatever it may be, all the things you need to do to get from A to B. But unfortunately, human behavior and progress isn't linear. You may have heard me talk about it before. There's different types of progress. I'm not going to go into it here because that's depth for another video, but it's not quite as simple as that. So we want to challenge this A to B straight line progress thinking model and show you something that actually works more in reality. So this is my 3C philosophy. This is that everything in Project Tempest is built upon this philosophy, okay? The idea that we exist on a continuum and we're trying to move from chaos to clarity to creation. When we look at this AB model, we basically try and jump from chaos to creation, and we skip the middle part, which is where all the good stuff happens. So for you right now, in the fade, you're in the chaos and you're stuck in this loop of trying harder, doing all the stuff up here in this gap and just layering on top of an already overloaded nervous system, and it ain't getting you anywhere. What we need to do instead is deal with the chaos, deal with the fade, in order to move towards clarity. Because when we hit the clarity phase, this is where we start to feel better. We have more capacity. We've got capacity infrastructure in place that allows us to monitor our capacity, increase it as needed. And we can start to open up and look at our lives and say, right, well, what's my vision? What do I want? What's my purpose? What's my identity? It gives us a new way of seeing life, seeing ourselves, and we can ultimately figure out these things that help enhance our capacity so that we can then start to move to the creation phase. The creation phase is where we work on whatever we want. So this is the goal the goal getter phase, essentially. You want a promotion, you want to get up in your career, you need to be in the creation phase. You want to go run a marathon, you want to be in the creation phase. This is where we can start to use the creation level tools that I spoke about here, and those tools will be relevant to whatever the specific goal is. But this is where we actually have the capacity, we're in the fire, we're able to use those tools to good effect to get the outcome that we want. There's absolutely no point focusing on time management when you're stuck over here in the fade. It's not going to help. Over here, you implement some time management principles and your productivity goes through the roof because you're in the state to use it. So hopefully this makes sense and it helps you identify why you haven't been able to progress up until now. So when we're over here, we're in the fire, our capacity is at its best, and we can actually start to improve our capacity and expand it because it's not fixed. If you take a look over here in the clarity phase, we've got the floor of our capacity, which is essentially the fade state, and we have the ceiling of our capacity, which is the fire. And we want to be working towards moving away from the fade and getting back into the fire. And that's what happens in the clarity phase. We feel pretty good. We sit somewhere between the two. But once you're consistently able to get towards the fire with greater capacity, then you can start to raise the ceiling. So when you hit the fade before, it might have been really catastrophic and damaging and you got stuck there for ages. You may notice next time you disappear towards the fade, because it may happen again, that's life, we're humans, shit happens. It's not quite as significant because what used to be your fade floor is now a slightly higher fade floor. And in doing that, as you raise the floor, you naturally start to raise the ceiling. So your new fire ceiling, you at your absolute best, is even better than it was before. And this is how we just continually get better and better and better. We just raise the floor, raise the floor, raise the floor. And as we do that, we naturally start to raise the ceiling. But that's, again, another high performance way of thinking that's a little bit outside the scope of this workshop. But it gives you the idea, okay? So you're here. We want to get to here, but we cannot skip the middle bit. So how do we start this process? What is the framework, the mechanism for beginning to get back our capacity? Well, we've got to install what I call capacity infrastructure. These are things that we can do within our day-to-day life to bring back our capacity, okay? Rather than doing all of this using creation level tools, we build infrastructure. And it's a 4-phase setup, okay? This is my framework, the R4 framework. Reset, recovery, regulation, and resilience. And it's important to note that this is the general order that most people would start in, but it is personal. You may have someone who has run a reset recently and they're actually doing okay, and what they actually need to emphasize instead is recovery practices and recovery rhythms, so they don't need a big reset. I've just taken some people through the Ground Zero program, and a lot of them have had to do big resets. And some of the feedback was, this is great. I want to implement recovery practices in a rhythm and, consistently, so that I don't have to do big resets. Don't want it to get to that point. Or maybe you've got some good recovery stuff in place and you're ticking along, but now you need to look at up leveling a little bit. We need to look at actually stress proofing it for your real world. So maybe you're in the resilience phase. It's so personal, which is why within Project Tempest, I build personal plans for you, because everybody is slightly different. There's not a one size fits all approach as such. But by implementing this R4 framework, we can begin to build this infrastructure into our daily lives to ensure that we have capacity and we can continue to build our capacity and up level as we go. So the 2 key things I want you to take away from this video are, 1, the change in model. Rather than trying to go from A to B, we go from chaos to clarity to creation. If you can start to internalize that model and that framework and that way of thinking, it changes things, changes your idea of progression, it changes the way you think about things. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is start to understand this framework, the R4 framework. When we reset, it's an acute intervention as such. Your nervous system fried, we need to just do an acute reset. Recovery, we start to put rhythms in to prevent us needing to reset. Regulation, this is where you start to look at things like cognitive performance, looking at balancing blood sugar, all those little daily things that we tend to forget when we're in the fade. We can start to enhance them here so that we're regulating our system. And then, of course, in resilience, that's where we stress-proof for real life. So that's the 4-step framework and my 3C philosophy. And hopefully that gives you an understanding now of how you can move from the fade back towards the fire. Now, in the next video, we're going to talk about this in a little bit more detail. I'm going to talk about how we can do this together if you want, and the different options that are available for you. Because when you start to work on this and you start to fix your capacity, then it's very easy to get back to the fire, and that fire will become your baseline. And then from there, you can just start raising the floor, and getting better and better and better. And that, of course, is going to contribute towards you achieving whatever goals you have set for yourself in this clarity phase here. It'll contribute towards you achieving the vision that you have for your life. Without capacity, you stay stuck. You stay stuck in a chaos. So go ahead and watch video 3, and I'll give you an idea of where to start with all of this.